Welcome to the Broken News. I'm your host, Ed Cavett. Today is the 16th of November, 2020, and if you do the math, we're well past the election, and Trump is still claiming that it's the most unfair and cheated on election in history, and so ever many people seem to think that too, while everyone else is like, it's really not. I mean, if you think about it, why are we going to cheat during the voting part of it? First of all, we're going to cheat way before we get to the voting part so that we get a ballot filled with dog shit. So by the time we get up to the actual voting where everyone's paying attention, it's already a done deal. So why cheat then when everyone's looking, when everyone's paying attention, when you have all these processes and double checks and balances and people looking and video cameras and cell phones, and how are you going to cheat? Really, explain this to me, David Blaine. So we're going to look at some Trump supporters who showed up in Washington, D.C., and I was a bit relieved, not really surprised, but a bit relieved because I expected 1 million people to show up exactly, and it was somewhere between 8 and 10,000 people. So that was a little bit of a relief. And then that melted away when CNN interviewed a person there, and that person explained why they were there. And this just opens a whole world view into why there were 8 to 10,000 people supporting Trump in against one of the fairest elections in the history of democracy. The other story I wanted to look at was Jimmy Dore having a blood pressure attack, getting an answer out of Ro Khanna during an interview on his show. He seriously couldn't expect that Ro Khanna was going to come out and just lay it bare and agree to everything. He has to go back to Washington. He has to go back to D.C. and swim with these sharks. But he showed up on the Jimmy Dore show anyway. And if you're going to take time out of Jimmy's day and his audience's day to get some hardball questions, the very least you can do is not give a total dog shit answer. So we're going to look at that interview. But first I wanted to go to the D.C. rally and see the interview with CNN and a Trump supporter.
Okay, tell me what your sign says.
Stop the steal.
And what does that mean?
It means that we want all of the votes audited and recounted.
Okay, audited and recounted, which they are being audited. The ones that need to be recounted are, and everything. Are we going to cheat during the most watched part of an election, or are we going to cheat when no one's paying attention well before the primaries and during the primaries? And that's kind of more on the up and up. There's cheating that goes on behind the scenes, and it's never really reaches the level where we're paying attention because, oh, I don't know, that's stupid. So as far as this election being rigged and that, 4 years ago, they were already making plans to make sure that no matter what you did, sure, you can try and do fraud, you can try and do this and that, but people are going to know about it. And since people are going to know about it, let's not do it, right? The logic of it, just none of this makes sense.
These swing states that stopped counting at midnight and mysteriously and miraculously came up with thousands of new votes.
Now, I bet she believes in miracles, but not this one. And she doesn't have to because it's not one.
The next day, and some of them are still counting, and we're saying we want an honest and fair election.
Do you want same places that Donald Trump won to also continue to count the vote?
Sure.
All of it.
If they're not done, yes.
So the states have said they continued counting to when they were supposed to. Their laws are in place to stop counting at a certain point. But anybody that got their votes in before November 3rd or on November 3rd are counted.
Because that's how elections work. It's not a hot pocket. We're not going to have 90 seconds in a microwave and out comes the election results. This all takes time. And we've never had an election like this in the midst of a pandemic. So, that's a little bit of an issue too. So let's all take that into account before we start claiming that the fairest election in democracy's history is rigged.
All of the different states. Do you think that all of the states that Donald Trump won were actually legitimate?
Absolutely.
And all of the states that Biden won, do you think those are legitimate as well?
I don't think all of them that he won were illegitimate. I think the ones that...
Let's stop that. Back it up. CNN asked, do you think that all the states that Donald Trump won were actually legitimate? And the woman responded, absolutely. And then CNN asked, and all the states that Biden won, do you think that they were legitimate as well? And the woman responds, I don't think all of them that he won were illegitimate. Let's play that again and listen to it. Listen to it carefully.
I think that all of the states that Donald Trump won were actually legitimate.
Absolutely.
And all of the states that Biden won, do you think those were legitimate as well?
I don't think all of them that he won were illegitimate. I think...
Is there an equivalency issue there? There's a clue to a narcissistic trait there that's even deeper than confirmation bias, because if it was just plain confirmation bias, I don't think that she would have responded in equal terms with legitimacy or legitimate, but she didn't. She switched it around. She took the disaffirmative part. You know, the CNN asked, do you think that they were actually legitimate? That's like an affirming context. And then when she replies in a disaffirming context using the word illegitimate. This is really telling on like a psychological level, and it points to this kind of narcissistic trait where people cannot accept the word no. You cannot tell some of these people no. When you tell them no, it is an autism meltdown for some of these people, and they don't even have autism. So I don't know what the excuse is.
The ones that stopped counting mysteriously at midnight, where Trump had a very significant lead, and there was water.
Okay, water pipes burst.
Into the...
Look at her friend there. I say her friend. It might be her husband. I don't know. I could only be left to speculate. But he is standing nearby, and he looks really uncomfortable about being standing close to her. Like, I feel like he wants to say, I don't know this woman, but he can't. Distinctly get the impression he is uncomfortable being either on TV, being called out at this Trump rally. Maybe this is his sister or his cousin. I can't imagine that they would have to share the same house and not be supportive of one another at a Trump rally. That would be awful, wouldn't it?
Nobody stopped counting mysteriously at midnight, just so you know.
Well, yes, they
they went by the law.
Okay, she's watching the news.
Follow it.
Yeah,
She follows it.
Followed elections for years.
Let me ask you.
She's been following elections for years. Okay, you can follow everything you want. But if you're not thinking critically about it, if you're not paying attention, if you're not skeptical or questioning it, then it's pointless. You're just a follower.
No, by the law. The media may say by the law. That's not what our Constitution says. And this
Okay, before we start saying what the Constitution says, let's remember that Amy Coney Barrett missed a question on constitutional law, and she's a Supreme Court Justice Associate. Before we start making claims about the Constitution, a lot of people do this, and they don't know what they're talking about, and I'm probably one of those too, and I know that. That's why if I start talking about the Constitution, I at least go back and try to read it and brush up on it, and maybe even ask a question to somebody that knows better than I do, or I listen to a video of somebody talking about it in detail and explaining it in nuance. You know what? I try to brush up before I just repeat talking points, and I think that's what that is. It's just a talking point. We can't expand on it.
It's what the state's constitutions say, though. There are state laws that are in place, right?
The legislatures are the ones that are going to step in now, because the courts, as we know...
Some of the legislators have stepped in and said this is a free and fair election, including...
I wish she hadn't cut her off about the courts, because I would love to have heard what she had to say about it.
One of the people that Donald Trump put in place, who is one of the federal security election officials, who has come out and said that all of his claims are baseless, that this was a free and fair election. What do you say to that? This is someone Donald Trump...
Okay, this is the part of the interview where the YouTube algorithm picks up on the song in the background.
Actually appointed to a position to be looking over for the security of the election.
I think that the people are not fooled. We've been to the rallies. We've watched the numbers. We've watched the media who continues to lie to us and hide information. We don't get our information from you all anymore.
Okay, she said the people aren't fooled. I'll agree with that. Is that why there's just 8,000 to 10,000 people there and not a million?
We get our
do you get it?
information directly from the people online, from their accounts. We're able to follow our representatives, follow our senators, follow the people that tell the truth.
I'm going to tell you what I follow. I follow facts. And if my representatives are following facts, well, then I'll follow facts. I don't follow representatives. Representatives follow me because the people are the leaders. I'm a leader as a person. Everybody who votes is a leader as a person, as the people. And then we elect representatives to fulfill that will that we have chosen for ourselves, right? That's how, I mean, it's in the word. Our representatives represent us. That means somebody else has to be a leader. Who's leading? We are. The people lead. So she's right about the people aren't fooled, and that's why you're there practically by yourself. Even the guy standing next to you doesn't want to be there.
Some of the senators that are Republican are saying, okay,
Sure,
you know,
some of them are, because some of them are part of the swamp, and that's why they need to be cleaned out.
you don't believe.
Okay, this swamp talking point is a revelation, because it's so much easier to think of what is going on in government. You know, I pointed out a little bit of a nuance that we have to be the leaders and our representatives represent us. That's a little bit of a nuance. I've thought about it. So I'm not talking about it in terms of an analogy. I'm talking about it directly. The swamp analogy is just an easier way to digest terms that about things that we either don't understand or aren't critically thinking about or relying on other people to tell us about. We have to think about the specifics so that we can bring them out. Because when we just use the analogy, the swamp analogy, it's a generalization. It just applies to everyone and everything. And then somehow the person that we support, they could be a swamp creature, but somehow they're not. Even though they live in the swamp and exist in the swamp, they're not a swamp creature. And then everybody else is a swamp creature and everything else is the swamp. So the analogy breaks down if you carry it out a little bit further. So that's why it's that's one part of an analogy being the problem, because it gets in the way of the thinking. We should be talking about the exact people who are perpetrating the exact crimes so that they can be exactly meant to pay for that and be held accountable. None of that happens. Nothing's enforced for these people. It is for us. I mean, you can't walk down the street and be black and break a law somehow. But then corporations can destroy half the planet, and that's okay. A slap on their wrist. They just go on business. That's the cost of doing business. That swamp thing is just a talking point. No one's thinking critically. They can't expand on it.
It says that this is a free and fair election. You think
Absolutely
was
not.
2016 a free and fair election?
Not. There was probably fraud then too.
Oh my God. There was probably fraud then too. That's so telling. We're not critically thinking. We're not critically thinking. You know, the thing about the press is, did she say that yet?
This swamp has gotten
think that
so
Donald
deep.
Trump
I
won
think that this
legitimately?
I think that the swamp is so deep that there's probably been fraud and cheating that have gone on for decades now.
Okay. If you think that, what are they? What is it? Are we just going to think it? We're not going to get down to the specifics of it? Oh, there was probably fraud. Okay, if there probably was, well, let's find out. Because it's probably still going on. And we're going to look in places it's not. Because we're delusional.
Out here in 2016. Why weren't you out here in 2016 if you thought there was fraud and when Donald Trump won?
Because it didn't matter to her then.
In all of the elections, and I'm not just talking about
And it really matters now for some reason.
federal elections, I'm talking about state and local elections. We now have this Dominion software that we have found a whole lot about, with it mysteriously has glitches, and they all go for Biden. People
I'm sorry, that's not true, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, yeah, time to go. And CNN ducks out. I'm ducking out too. That Dominion software, give me a break. I've said this is one of the most transparent things. We knew for years coming into this that it all had to be legitimate, and there's too many interests for it to not be on the up and up. And there's also ways to double check it on a private sector level, so any individual can check these results. this whole Dominion thing, that's just another, here's a fork with something on the end. Here, just take what's on the end, look at what's on the end. Don't look at the fork, don't look at who's holding it. Just take that in and trust that that's going to do good for you. I look at the hand that feeds me. I see the fork, and I'm not taking it. You got to think critically about the world, or we're going to have kings and dictators and political factions ruling people as leaders instead of the people ruling themselves as leaders and having representatives do that for them. What's next on here? The Ro Khanna interview. Jimmy Dore, Ro Khanna. Let's just jump in.
So, okay, here's a question no one else will ask you. So, at the beginning of the pandemic, the leadership of both parties pushed through the CARES Act, right? So despite a few pieces of window dressing for regular people, this was the biggest upward transfer of wealth to the 1% in the history of the human race. And all the progressives, including Bernie Sanders and the squad, went along and voted for this. So
Yeah, I voted for it, yeah.
And Pelosi put it to a voice vote to protect everybody from going on the record for or against. So when history calls upon them to oppose oligarchy and a corrupt system, what is the point of having elected progressives in power if they just go along and follow orders from their party leadership anyway?
Oh, doesn't that question sound good just to hear, have that posed toward an intelligent question that has a lot of the information in it, has the indictments? Answer for yourself. And Jimmy has a lot of hope on his face right now. He's, this is a tough question to answer. I hope you're up for it. That's what his face is telling me. Now, Jimmy's not so naive as to expect that Ro Khanna is going to reveal in absolute terms what is going on. He's going to, I don't know, be mealy-mouthed about it. Watch the entire interview. Here's the info card here. And his answers aren't going to be satisfying. It's not a matter of what Jimmy wants to hear. It's a matter of what Jimmy has to hear, because that's the only answer that fits. That's the only one that actually works in the equation. So Ro Khanna has a choice to just state the answer, or he can dance around it. And guess what he does? No one's surprised. I wasn't surprised by it. Jimmy was maybe a little bit surprised because Ro seems to at first reveal a little bit more honesty than you could get out of even Nancy Pelosi trying to hide everyone's vote. So let's listen to this a little bit further.
Oh, that was not following orders. It was a tough decision. Look, I grant you that there was too much of.
Okay, and Jimmy's holding back here. You know he is. It's a tough decision. Oh yeah, he agrees with that. So far they agree. He's a little hopeful they agree so far.
An excess giveaway to large corporations and large businesses.
And that's where he starts losing hope. We'll listen to Ro's answer, his bullshit answer, even though it's, I don't even know why. It's just sound.
But remember, it also had a $1,200 check for families. It also had increased funding for small businesses, for restaurants, for people who are hurting. It increased unemployment insurance and gave extra $600 a week plus the unemployment extension. So,
okay, all of the stuff it gave wasn't enough. There's still more small businesses that are closing at record numbers now, and they won't come back. And the ones that haven't closed are being gobbled up by corporations to make these monopolies that the government won't enforce the monopoly laws. So for all the good that the front end of that, and Jimmy called it window dressing, and that's exactly what it was. It was a way to, here, look at this. You're shaking keys over here, and then you're letting them, clean out your house on the other side. Jimmy calls it out.
There were a lot of things in there that did help working families.
Look at Jimmy. Cut back to Jimmy, arms crossed, chest heaving, vein bulging. You can see his blood pressure is rising. He's chewing his lip, he's grinding his molars, and you know what? He looks like everyone watching this interview.
Families and small businesses. We can argue whether the balance, you should have voted no or yes, and I think on balance it helped more than it hurt. But that was the rationale.
So we won't argue because there's nothing to argue about.
And you know that's right. There was nothing to argue about. It's like I said, there's an equation here, and when you put all the terms in it and you try to fit it into the answer that Ro Khanna just gave, it doesn't fit. It doesn't come out. It doesn't equate. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit reality in an empirical and objective way. So Jimmy is waiting for what does make sense, and he's checking the answer, and that's not it. There's nothing to debate. You got this answer wrong. I asked you a question, you got the answer wrong. It's not up for interpretation. This is what's happened. This is what explains it. Are you going to admit to that, or are you just going to, I don't know, do what the establishment has leaned on you because you have to go back and try to work with these assholes? Sounds like B.
You all voted for the largest upward transfer of wealth in the history of human race. Everybody knew it was coming, who knew anything, who read not. It's just shock doctrine, because this is exactly what they did in 2008. It's exactly what and they did it this time with like in a week and a half. It took them a few months last time, but this time they knew they got it down. They did it right away, and they got all of you to go along with that. And so they used that window dressing, that bullshit $1,200 and the unemployment extension, so you guys could hide behind that. And that was horrible what you did.
But Jimmy, you don't think that made a difference in people's lives? I'm sure you know people who got
Yeah.
$1,200 or the unemployment extension.
So of course, Ro, that's exactly the bullshit line that's why that's in there, so you can come on here and say that while you voted for the largest upward transfer of wealth in the history of the human race during a crisis without giving health care to people and using your leverage. That's the only time that the progressives had any leverage, and you totally rolled over for the machine.
That's exactly right. And that felt good to hear somebody speak to power. Speak truth to power. We should be able to do that in America. That's what it's founded on. And the only way that we can do that is by being able to think critically about things and demanding consequence, accountability. There is none. The establishment, even Ro Khanna, he has to go along with it. You know, if I was a general manager and I had a bunch of stores and one of those stores was having problems, I would visit that store. I would see, hey, what's the problem here? And when you look around and the problems are everywhere, you know what you do? You get rid of everyone. You know what you don't do? You don't bring in just one good person and expect everyone to play nice and the problems to just automatically fix themselves. It takes more than just one good person going into huge amounts of problems being perpetrated by everyone and expect the problems to go away. Sometimes you just have to clean house, and that's what elections are for. So this next 4 years, when they're already preparing for 2024, so, and we've got the 2 years coming up to get rid of some of these other people. Let's be critical. Let's hold them accountable, and let's remember these non-answers to tough questions that they should be asked by the media all the time, but they aren't. It takes some jagoff comic in his garage to ask the hard questions. You want to know why I'm doing this? Is because I might reach 10 or 12 people that nobody else is going to reach, or if they do, they're going to reach them in the wrong way with bullshit. At least I'm trying to put it out there in a way that it's fair and it's reasonable. I try to be esoteric enough to where I'm not so specific and I'm isolating, but at the same time, you can't work in general terms. You have to be very specific. The general terms turn into talking points, they turn into non-answers, and we never really get down to the nitty-gritty. And we're never going to get down to that with people that are, Ro Khanna, as far as politicians go, that's probably one of the best ones that you're going to see. And still, do you see what we get? So the best are still shitty. I want to vote. I want to have a ballot that has people I want to vote for. I don't want a ballot filled with people I'm voting against. That's broken right there. So we can have all the fair elections in the world, but if the ballot's broken, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what box I check. So that's it for the broken news. Hopefully next week we'll have an answer on whether or not President Trump is going to be dragged out of the White House by his hair. Is it drugged? It's dragged, isn't it? It's not drugged. It's dragged. Dragged out of the White House by his hair, or whether he's just going to leave on his own. So join me next week for the broken news, and we'll find out about that. Until next time, take care and maintain hope in truth.